Welcome back, everyone, to Point of Sale, the retail supply chain show where we break down great retailers and the data and technology that, of course, move their supply chains. Now, before we get into our show today, which is going to be a lot of education, a lot of forecasting, a lot of looking back at the last year with a guest that you should be familiar with. He's been on the show a couple of times. I figured, why not look into wonderful industry events coming up that you and all retail fans out there can get excited to enjoy this summer. I mean, it's pretty much the summertime. In Michigan, we're going from a nice 90-degree weekend to a 30-degree week, back and forth. And if you're experiencing the same, you're probably over it. But soon, I'm sure it'll be a nice day pretty much every day all week. And when that comes, why not start traveling? And we've got a couple of events here that I definitely think you should consider jumping into this summer. Now, the first one is, of course, our Future of Supply Chain show in Cleveland, Ohio. I am very excited for this. One, I will say, is because we get to do the radio show from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that is going to be really cool. And of course, thank you to JB Hunt 360 for putting on their party at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. Now, the best part about this, though, for all of our viewers and listeners of this show, is we've got some major retailers showing up for this wonderful conference here in Cleveland. First is Coca-Cola, which I've been a huge fan of, not just Coca-Cola. If you guys have seen some of my other podcasts, I am a Coca-Cola or Pepsi chick, but a huge fan of actually their supply chain and the way they manage it, all the way down to their Kona services, which maybe is something we'll talk about at the event as well. If you've never heard of it, well, I'm going to pencil that in as an episode in the future, but they've made some incredible investments in their supply chain, and a company that deals with so many different SKUs, has acquired so many different companies over the last couple of years, and is really pivoted to continue to be the most, my opinion, stable drink brand out there. I'm really excited to see Rob join us for this event as well. I got a chance to meet him at a conference last year, and he was very excited to be a part of this. So I'm very pumped to see what he has to say at the show. We also will have L'Oreal there and Black Rifle Coffee, to name a few other retailers. If you're a fan of this show, you remember a couple of weeks ago, we also had a wonderful helper of our e-commerce merchants, Shopify, on the show. Well, she will be back on at this event at the Future Supply Chain in Cleveland. We'll have major tech groups like Shopify there to discuss how they're helping retailers, of course, manage not only their supply chains, but in times like this, when consumer spending is low, and we'll get into this actually here in a few, it's time to look for new customers. And whether that's marketing or improving your supply chain, becoming a best and show shipper, or being able to manage production from different sites, near shore, etc. Well, Shopify has a hand in that as well. Some really interesting case studies I hope that she brings up during the show too. So just to name a few really great topics that we'll be touching on as well, of course, is the market and future market of CPG, retail, food and beverage, packaging and paper goods. We'll ask the question of why consumers are shifting down market in CPG and food and beverage. We've JP Hampstead put out a wonderful article talking about Walmart. We've discussed it on this show too. How we're not only seeing regular Walmart shoppers, right, starting to purchase more of the private Walmart brands, but we're seeing luxury shoppers, higher income shoppers coming to Walmart compared to their normal grocery store routine. So Trader Joe's, things of that nature, right? So why is that happening, and how long will that shift last, and how are retailers and CPG companies pivoting in order to meet that consumer where they are? We'll talk about clearly in this, not just in this channel, but if you're a fan of Running on Ice with Mary O'Connell, trends in cold chain warehousing, and of course, where and how are we building our retail inventory? I think that's something we'll talk about a little bit today, but that's a huge challenge, right? We just saw the a wholesale inventory to sales ratio data come out, and we still have a lot of inventory at our shelves. So how are we figuring out what our consumers want, what they need, and where they're spending it, so that we can be more cautious or possibly aggressive in the next upcoming year. So make sure that you guys go check that out. Head to live.freightwaves.com and go ahead and get your tickets and hotel rooms for that wonderful event so you can see us all in person and get back together with the FreightWaves family. As we go down too, I'll give you one that's outside of FreightWaves, the NRF, the National Retail Federation Protect. So a couple weeks ago, we did a really cool episode. You guys can all check out these old episodes wherever you listen to podcasts, or head to FreightWaves TV at tv.freightwaves.com. We did an episode on how retailers are actually investing too much into protecting their supply chain in stores that it's actually affecting the consumer, right? So I noticed the other day when I was at a Dollar General to get a candle, it was behind a lock and key, which I thought was pretty odd. I've seen those type of items maybe have like a code on there to make sure no one steals it. Beeps, makes a certain noise if it's taken out of the store. But even in that situation, I was like, yeah, I don't really need and have the time to call a person over and have this unlocked, especially a running joke that usually there's only one person ever working in a Dollar General. So I didn't buy it. And that's the type of decision that a lot of purchasers and consumers are making. So we did looked into a lot of NRF data and found that a lot of this action in particular that's really affecting the supply chain when it comes to theft is happening during the warehouse to warehouse moves, or from actual coming off of the boat, if we're looking at bringing that in, importing it to its final destination or final warehouse. It's not actually happening as much in stores. So if you're interested, you can go to nrf.org, their website, and they have an NRF Protect group. I'd say it's not much of a convention and more of a big industry meeting from June 5th to the 7th in Grapevine, Texas. And it's to address the changing threats in retail, create new strategies in order to combat retail crime that they're seeing today. So if that episode hits you in some type of way and you're part of that supply chain, which is a huge point of it, right? Then make sure you go check out that event as well. But let's say you're saying, well, listen, I want more data and I kind of want it today. Well, guess what? At the actually tomorrow. Wow, time flies. On April 20th, tomorrow at 2 p.m. is our monthly State of Freight webinar, and this one is presented by Uber Freight as well. It's a free event. You just have to go and register for that. You can find that on the front page of FreightWaves. Just scroll down right underneath the sonar information. You'll see that there. Make sure you register for that, even if you can't make that time, because in 24 hours, we will send you an on-demand link to watch it as well, which you can share with your training programs, your managers, everyone else within your company so that they can all learn. But we'll have some wonderful insight from, well, of course, wonderful Craig Fuller, our FreightWaves founder and CEO, the Sultan of Sonar, head of Freight Market Intelligence, Zach Strickland, and then Adam Josephson, our senior vertical expert as well. And we'll talk about ways to prepare for upcoming market changes, give you an advanced look into expectations for the remainder of Q2, some actual insights to drive your efficiencies, reduce costs, and of course, mitigate risks, and then some opportunities at the end for you to ask questions. And those will be answered live by our experts as well. So we've got a lot of great content coming for you this summer. I just wanted to make sure you got those all in your calendar. And again, make sure you register for tomorrow's State of Webinar presented by the wonderful Uber Freight. Now, let's get into it today. Like I said, you're going to recognize this guest because he's been on the show before. I want to bring to you the Chief Revenue Officer of C3 Solutions, Greg Braun. Greg, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Well, thanks for having me, Grace. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited because your company has been very busy, I'd say, really educating not only your customers and consumers alike. You put out a wonderful white paper recently on the retail reset and had a webinar focusing on gaining maximum ROI in an economic downturn. So I figured we could review a lot of these topics today and bring that education to our audience as well. And I want to focus first on the market research that you did, because this was a really great outlook, especially thinking back to the episodes that we've done together. Really a review of a lot of what we talked about in the past and interesting insight on the future. What was the main focus for you in the market research report on retail reset, and what were you hoping to discover more for your customers as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, the key focus of the report was that, since around 2019, there's been a, rather profound change in, the shift from brick and mortar stores to e-commerce. Now, obviously, that process had started, much earlier than in 2019, but most companies were gradually increasing their e-commerce sales, and then COVID hit. So, with COVID, retailers really that had been slow to kind of embrace an omni-channel strategy were really put into a reactive mode. And there was a massive investment to kind of link e-commerce platforms to their physical stores and to the rest of the supply chain. So those are some of the things that we discuss. The report also, looks at the supply chain disruptions and how they initiated a departure from, say, a just-in-time inventory strategy to more of a just-in-case approach. And that kind of an outlook kind of ultimately led to the situation where, with this kind of softening economy in the post-COVID era, we resulted in kind of some excess inventories. And if you fast forward to 2023, where we have a much softer economy, those excess inventories have really provided an opportunity for second market or discount stores. So we also look at how, value retailers and dollar stores, and I know you were mentioning it earlier, Grace, how, they've really seen a real increase in business due to companies that just unloading excess inventory and consumers being much more cost conscious. So those are the more important kind of themes that we kind of discuss in the paper.
Well, let's talk about those challenges in particular, and what noticeable differences did you see between challenges that retailers were facing in 2022 and even maybe that trickled in from 2021, and the outlook for the rest of 23? How have those challenges changed or maybe have stayed the same, and what are the main focus for retailers today?
Well, some of the focuses, I mean, some of the challenges they're up against today is, I mean, as you again, you'd mentioned earlier, there's been a softening of the economy, and inflation is really a big concern that's out there. So, essentially, some of the trends or what have you is that retailers are very concerned right now in terms of how can they take those, their increased costs, and how can they kind of convey those over to consumers without, causing further disruption in the economy and so forth. So retailers are very concerned with automation. How can they, essentially get more out of, existing their existing labor forces, and also given the fact that there still is a labor shortage out there, so those are some of the big trends. I mean, obviously, omnichannel is still a trend that's being, that companies are still, dealing with. I mean, if we talk to when I look at our customers out there, it's almost all of them still see Amazon as their biggest competitor. So, those are some of the key trends that are out there.
I love that you brought up labor. I believe it was Mark Solomon wrote an interesting article on especially warehouse labor over the last so many years, and how competitive that space has become, just like pretty much every other labor work within our industry as well, and just the increase in wages, and making sure it's less of what a warehousing job would have been clearly in before 2000s, into almost more of like this work-life balance structure that we see even in warehousing today. I'm interested, can you dive a little bit deeper into how retailers are, especially if they're having to pay more for labor, right? And you're talking about bringing costs down. How are they making investments in their warehouse, whether it's automation, technology, et cetera, or even their employees, to bring those costs down over time? So yeah, that's not pushed over to the consumer as well.
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is there's been a lot of investment in, if you again, you look at COVID, some of the effects of COVID, we had the massive disruptions in supply chain. So what we're seeing is companies are investing in, so they're looking at investing in improving their supply chains. In our report as well, I believe there was a Deloitte, we quoted a Deloitte study that said, 8 out of 10 senior executives we're looking in the next year, we're looking at either making moderate or massive improvements to their supply chains. So I think one of the outcomes of the pandemic was that companies realized that they have a much more nimble supply chain, and ultimately, again, as I mentioned, they need to look at how they can further automate their operations. And regarding the supply chain, we just don't know what the next major issue is going to be. So retailers really need to be able to adjust quickly and have the supply chains systems that are going to support that. So that's again what we discussed in the paper, as well as what we're seeing out there on a day-to-day basis.
I'm interested, you brought up the consumer as well. I'm interested from your point of view, how do you see the consumer's behavior maybe changing, or even the consumer's pockets? Like when you're talking to your customers, are they seeing more consumer spending near the end of the year? Are they seeing it already? Where's the consumer right now in your eyes, and how is that concerning the overall retailer today?
Well, I mean, I can't say directly in terms of what we're hearing about consumers, but what I can tell you though is that all of our customers that are in that value or the discount or the value retailers, they're seeing a huge increase in business. There's no doubt about that. So what that tells me is consumers are being much more cost conscious. They're being much more, they're scrutinizing purchases much more. You mentioned earlier how Walmart, I think, came out with statistics recently saying how the average income of their typical customers is going up. So that's what we're seeing also. I was recently talking to some customers or potential customers in the value space, and they are so busy right now. So, and again, that was some of the things we touched on in that report. All that secondary inventory out there. These guys are seeing that as a massive opportunity, and so what you're seeing is a lot of people that maybe didn't used to shop at a TJX. Now that's where they're a TJ Maxx, I should say. That's they're shopping there now, as well as Walmart and a lot of those other retailers. So I guess the message that we're giving to our non-value retailers is we're saying, hey, we're there to help you eliminate any extra costs out of your business, because as much as you're maybe not going to change your entire business plan, you still need to be able to provide as low cost products as you can. And the way you do that is by, obviously taking costs out of the system. So, and that's where companies like C3 are able to help.
Awesome. When you're speaking with them as well, do you feel like consumers are still just as interested in the online purchases, even down to last mile delivery capabilities? Are they just going straight to stores to save costs, or are they still interested in these more convenient ways to shop that exploded right after the pandemic hit?
Well, I mean, that's what our research shown is that that demand is continuing. We saw that the general trend of e-commerce over the pandemic, it increased across the board by as much as 5%. Which with those kind of changes is quite substantial. So yeah, I mean, all indications would show that the current the current kind of buying patterns of consumers is continuing, and there's no reason to think that that's going to change.
I like that. I think it's kind of like you're saying as well. Like we still, as a consumer, we understand that maybe our purchasing power has fallen, but we still are invested in some of these technologies that are coming from retailers as well in that regard. So it's interesting from your work that you're seeing that they're at least trying to bring the cost down of of that automation and of that, I guess, change in customer behavior in order to make that continue to have that be an attractive way of purchasing as well. And I'm interested in this webinar that you had in gaining the maximum ROI in economic downturns. Can you tell us a few of the major points that you took from that? Because I think, what's interesting is I think sometimes these times happen and people kind of pull back a little on their pockets and rethink maybe some of the investments that they made. But also, when you research other recessions and situations, you find that the people or the companies, retailers in particular, that come out the other end of it as giants made the most investment during the hard times. So, what did you find in that webinar? Can you tell us a few points that you're able to pull from that in that discussion?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was actually a really good discussion that we had. We actually had two different retailers on that webinar. One was from CNS Wholesale Grocers in the New England area. The other was Rooms to Go in Central Florida. And, they were both, and part of the objective of the webinar was to talk about kind of neglected areas of the supply chain, which we believe are, like, say, for example, yard management and dock scheduling. So, and these are areas where they've not had a lot of attention put towards them in terms of investment. And the whole purpose of our webinar was just to put a little bit of a focus on that to show people that, hey, there is a substantial return on investment to be had here. And it was really quite interesting. I mean, both of the participants, were just talking about, hey, they could not imagine going back to life without an automated system. And when we're talking about, say, for example, yard management, usually we're, as a provider in that area, it's extremely rare that we're going to show up and replace an existing system. What we will do, though, is we'll be replacing very manual processes. And we're talking about, yards where there could be up to, several hundred trailers that have inventory in them and so forth, and there's really no system that manages any of this. So that was one of the things we wanted to emphasize, that, hey, this is, there's a very, interesting or very kind of substantial return on investment out there, and it's something that's very doable. And then some of the other comments we had from the participants is, like, for example, in the area of dock scheduling, again, it's not necessarily seen as an area that's going to provide a lot of return. But, the gentleman from Rooms to Go was talking about how when they implemented that system, they were able to actually reduce a lot of other manual processes, which had, again, kind of historically been attached to that, that process. So they improved, they took out tens of hours of manual labor per day out of previous tasks, what they just took for granted, that there was, there wasn't really a system to kind of manage that. So yeah, it was really insightful to find that, these are two top retailers, and how they were able to take this and really look at it as kind of a low-hanging fruit. I mean, these are not areas where, I think, again, historically, people don't see that there is a massive return there. And I think both of these gentlemen in this case confirmed that there is a substantial return on investment to be had in an area. And again, it has a ripple effect throughout the operation as well. When you improve an area as fundamental as, say, managing your yard, that's going to also translate into providing more productivity in the warehouse. Getting advanced visibility is going to just reduce product lead times. There's all kinds of other areas that are going to be affected by this. So yeah, it was a very interesting webinar.
Yeah, and again, one thing I love about especially investing in, like, your yard management, just that area of or transaction, right, within a supply chain, is there's so many different parties that will find that advantageous. Not only, of course, you yourself, the warehouse, and your workers, which you're now going to retain better, which is a huge cost to have to continue to recruit if you need to. But you also have the carriers, right? And right now we're in a market where carriers don't really have a lot of choices, but this industry is, boys, it's cyclical, and that will flip. And the people that have made those investments, the carriers will remember that, right, in the future.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I had a very interesting conversation with a manufacturer the other day. And it was interesting because I know, Grace, you and I have had these conversations a few times about being a shipper of choice and so forth. And I guess sometimes in our world, we may think that they're kind of cliches and what have you. But these guys were talking to me and they literally told me, look, we need to be more of a shipper of choice because we believe we could actually be losing sales from the fact that our our appointment, our receiving process is so antiquated that our customers don't want, they've been told by their carriers, we don't want you to buy from that company because it takes us too long to actually get a delivery there. So they're going to go to their competition to buy a product just because they know they're not going to have to fight with their carriers. So, that was amazing for me to hear that it gets right down to that level. If you neglect your driver, just driver wait time and so forth, it can come right down to lost sales. I mean, we always talk about gaining productivities and eliminating the detention, the demurrage costs, but this is the first time I've heard someone say, "Look, we actually think we're losing sales because we're not a shipper of choice," which ultimately that's what it's at. That's where it's at, I should say.
Hey, the lessons got to be learned some way, so I appreciate that insight as well. And Greg, thank you so much for joining me on this show. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll have you on again soon. For everyone out there, head to c3solutions.com to learn more about their company as well. And unfortunately, I'm out of time, but we'll be back here again. Well, not next week because we'll have our Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit, but the week after, we'll be back with you all. Until then, keep on shopping, so we still have a show. Wow.